Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, we're going to be diving into a really fascinating concept today. It actually comes from a recent devotional by Pastor Hugh, which builds on some of John MacArthur's writings on the Gospel of Matthew, specifically chapter 6. We're looking at a problem that is, frankly, universally experienced but rarely discussed with any real clarity, and that is this idea of spiritual debt. To really wrap our heads around it, we're going to look at it through a super relatable lens: daily hygiene.
Now, I want you to ask yourself something right out of the gate. We live in a society that is literally obsessed with physical cleanliness, right? I mean, you go to the gym, you work up a sweat, you come home, and you take a shower. It's totally automatic. You wouldn't even dream of going days without washing off the physical dirt of the world. But what about your soul? Because throughout our day, we all accumulate this sort of invisible spiritual grime. And yet, so many of us just go to sleep without ever even thinking to wash it off. This central hygiene metaphor is going to completely change how we look at our inner lives today.
Okay, let's dive into this. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 12, there's a really famous line that asks for the forgiveness of our debts. But the source material makes it crystal clear that this is not about owing someone money. No, spiritual debt refers to those daily, subtle, sinful thoughts, attitudes, and actions that just slowly build up a barrier between us and God. Pastor Hugh points out that these unholy thoughts and intentions are actually our greatest enemies. They are the common root of human sorrow, guilt, and just general moral pain. And you know what the most startling part is? There is no natural remedy for this. You can't just sleep it off or, drink a bunch of water to make it go away.
To really grasp the gravity of this, the source brings up a pretty heavy theological truth from the book of Jeremiah. It asks, can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard its spots? It's a rhetorical question, right? And the answer is obviously a resounding no. This brilliantly highlights just how deeply ingrained this spiritual debt, the sinful nature, truly is. The text argues that human beings are so accustomed to doing wrong that entirely on our own, we are just incapable of simply choosing to be perfectly pure. In fact, according to the Gospel of John, humanity often doesn't even want its spiritual sickness to be healed in the first place. So you might be wondering, how do we get so deep into this spiritual debt without even noticing? Well, notice how stealthy this problem is. Think about a brand new, highly collectible action figure. Like right when you take it out of the box, it is absolutely pristine. The colors are super bright, the plastic is perfect. But if you leave that action figure just sitting on a shelf for a year, it gathers this slow, microscopic layer of dust. You look at it every single day, so you don't even realize it's getting dirty. But if you take a damp cloth and just wipe half of its face, the contrast is shocking. Our source compares this to a stark white wall that over the years slowly turns yellow and gray. We look at it every day, and Satan makes us so accustomed to this gradual degradation that we actually convince ourselves the gray wall is still snow white. We literally forget what true purity looks like.
To make this even more concrete, Pastor Hu shares a highly relatable and, honestly, kind of uncomfortable physical analogy. Let's set the scene here. Imagine the absolute sweltering heat of June and July in Hualien, Taiwan. If you have ever experienced a tropical summer, you know exactly what this means. The humidity is thick, the sun is just blazing, and just standing outside for like 5 minutes leaves you completely drenched in sweat. So during one of these incredibly brutal hot summers, a distant relative came to stay at the pastor's home. When night fell, they politely asked the guest if he wanted to take a shower before bed. And his response? I hardly sweat. I don't need to shower. They asked him again, obviously given the brutal weather they had all just been through, but he just stubbornly refused. He insisted he was perfectly clean. This is a kind of funny but definitely gross example of what it means to be completely nose-blind to yourself.
But as you might guess, that ignorance has consequences. The very next morning, right after the guests left, the hosts had to completely strip the bed. They had to take all the bed sheets, the blankets, the pillowcases, the whole shebang, and throw them straight into the washing machine because the lingering smell of sweat was just so overwhelmingly strong. The guest was completely oblivious to his own mess, but his lingering odor was deeply physically felt by everyone else in that house. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact dynamic of our spiritual lives. You might walk through a really messy, morally complex day, accumulate all sorts of cynical thoughts, selfish motives, little minor grievances, and at the end of the day, you just say, I'm fine. I didn't do anything terrible today. I don't need to confess anything. It's exactly like that guest saying, I didn't sweat. But the text asks us to completely shift our perspective to a holy, perfectly pure God. Are you truly without odor? Just because you are nose-blind to your own spiritual grime doesn't mean it isn't there.
This brings us to a foundational Christian text from 1 John. And the source material notes a really important distinction here. For believers, the ultimate penalty of sin has already been paid. They possess a promised eternal salvation. That is kind of like the initial ultimate bath. However, just because you are ultimately saved doesn't mean you don't accumulate daily dirt. When Jesus washed his disciples' feet, he was painting a picture of this exact truth. We constantly need the daily water and soap of God's practical forgiveness to wash away the everyday stains of living in a fallen world.
So what does this all mean for how we respond to the dirt? Notice the stark contrast in approaches here. The worldly approach is all about self-reliance. When people recognize they've done wrong, they often try to balance out the cosmic scales themselves. They rely on their intellect, their background, their good deeds, or maybe ascetic practices to sort of self-heal. They try to scrub themselves clean. But the Christian approach, it requires admitting complete helplessness. It acknowledges that human beings are trapped in a mess they absolutely cannot fix themselves, and they have to rely entirely on the cleansing power of Christ.
It really all boils down to a super simple medical truth. You absolutely must admit you are sick to get the cure. The explainer highlights that Jesus presented himself as a doctor. And who needs a doctor? Not the healthy people, but the sick ones. When people claim they have no sin or that they're spiritually perfectly fine all on their own, they are basically acting like a person with a terminal illness who absolutely refuses to go to the hospital. Denying your condition doesn't make you healthy. It simply means you're actively rejecting the only available cure.
So how do we actually apply this in real life? Well, Pastor Yu offers this beautifully structured nightly routine, what we can call the daily spiritual bath. Before you go to sleep tonight, try following these 4 steps. Step 1, thank God for the experiences of the day. Step 2, reflect honestly. Look back and recognize where you might have offended God, hurt others, or maybe compromised your own integrity in what you said, heard, or thought. Step 3, confess this directly to Jesus. Ask for his true forgiveness and the strength to not repeat those mistakes, just openly admitting your weakness. And step 4, having done all this, you can lay your head on your pillow with a completely light, relaxed heart and sleep in profound peace, knowing you are fully cleansed.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely vital question. Are you ready to wash off today's invisible dirt before you go to sleep? We spend so much time making sure our physical bodies are clean, healthy, and presentable. But real peace, that comes from recognizing our spiritual reality, admitting our need for a wash, and stepping into the grace that clears our spiritual debts daily. Think about that as you're getting ready for bed tonight. Thanks for joining me on this one, and take care.